The slope of a line is just the steepness of a line. You can think about if you are going skiing, if you're on a bunny slope, that's the slope of a line that is not very steep. And if you're going on a more challenging course, then you're going to have a line that's very steep. And slope is how much you change going from one point to another as you count up, and that's called the rise. And then the denominator of your fraction is going to be the run, which is how much you change going from one point to another sideways. And we're going to look at an example. So in this example, if we're going from 4-1 to 1-2, we went up 1. So 1 is our rise, and we went backwards 3. So -3 is our run, so our slope is -1/3. Or we could have counted the other way, started with 0.12 and counted down 1 to get a -1 in our numerator, and counted forward 3 to get a +3 in our denominator. So again, this is called rise over run. And let's try another example together. So in this example, we're going to start with -4-2 together, and we're going to count and see how far up we have to go and how far over we have to go. Remember that you want your y's to be in the numerator for your slope. That's called your rise. Your change in y's is called your rise. And then run is in your denominator, and then your change in x's is called your run. So if we were to go from -4-2 up to -1-4, let's see what the change would be going from this point up to this point. Should be +2. So that's going to be our numerator. And then our run is how far sideways we're going to go, and that should be +3. So they're both positive because we went up, so up is positive, and we went forward, and forward is positive. Now try it going from -1-4 down to -4-2 and see what you get. So when we go the other way, if we start at -1-4, we're going to go down 2, so that means our numerator is -2, and then we're going to go backwards 3. So that means our denominator is -3. Again, that still gives us a slope of +2/3, either way that you do it. Another way to figure out the slope between two lines or 2 points on a line is to use a formula. So we have this formula, m equals y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. And all that means is you take your two ordered pairs and you look at them as x1, y1, and x2, y2. So the little numbers are just helping us differentiate between the two different ordered pairs. And we take the y value that's in the first ordered pair, and we subtract the y value that's in the second ordered pair from it. And then we take the x value that's in the first ordered pair, and we subtract the x value that's in the second ordered pair from it, and that will also give us the slope. Now we use this technique when all we know are the two ordered pairs and we don't have a graph. If we have a graph, we just count like we did here. Okay? So let's see how this works. So with y1 minus y2, we're going to take 4, which is our y value in this ordered pair, and then subtract 2, which is our y value in that pair. Next, we're going to take -1, which is the x value in the first ordered pair, and subtract -4, which is the x value in the second ordered pair. And keep in mind, you might want to change subtraction to addition to make this easy. So you get 4 plus -2 over -1 plus 4. And that gives you 2/3, which is the same thing that we got when we counted on the graph. So those are two different techniques for finding the slope depending on what you're given. So if you're given the graph, you can just count like we did and do rise over run. And if you're given two ordered pairs, you can use the slope formula and substitute the numbers in. So let's try an example using the slope formula where all you're given are two ordered pairs. So I'm going to add this example into our notes. So let's say you're given the ordered pair -3, 2, and the other ordered pair is 4, -5. We're just going to use the formula, since we don't have this on a graph, we're going to use the formula to find the slope. So you're going to have m equals rise over run. And we use that for counting on the graph, but for our formula, it's just you subtract the y's and then you subtract the x's. What you want to make sure of is that these two are in the same ordered pair and these two are in the same ordered pair. All right, so take a minute and put these numbers in and see what you get for the slope. So here we substituted 2 minus -5 to subtract our y values, and then we substituted -3 minus 4 to substitute our x values, and you end up with -1. I'm writing it as -1/1 because when you work with slope's actually a ratio, and so you don't want whole numbers and you don't want mixed numbers. You always want to see what the numerator is and what the denominator is, and you'll see why when we get into graphing with slope. Now, another thing I want to mention is that it really doesn't matter which of these ordered pairs you start with. So we could have done it backwards. So we could have said -5 minus 2. In other words, we could have let this be x1, y1, and this one be x2, y2. It doesn't matter. So we could have started with -5 as our first y value minus the 2, and then 4 minus the -3. And notice if you do that, you still end up with the same answer. So you still end up with -7/7, which is -1/1. The important thing is you always want to make sure that this is an ordered pair and this is an ordered pair. So to review, slope is just rise over run, and that's where you count how far up you go between two ordered pairs over how far sideways you go between two ordered pairs to find the slope. And we call that rise over run. And then the formula, when you're given two ordered pairs but you don't have the graph, is to subtract the y's over subtracting the x's. So let's move on and do a couple of examples. So here we're given just the ordered pairs, therefore we can't count on a graph. I mean, we could graph them and then count, but instead we're just going to use the formula. So let's do number 1 together. So our formula is y sub 1 minus y sub 2 over x sub 1 minus x sub 2. We're going to start by putting in the y values. So I'm going to put in -2 and 4 for my y values. Usually the most common mistake is people mess up and they put x values first on the top instead of y. So just remember, y's go on top. Rise over run is y's over x's. Then for the denominator, we're going to put our x values in the same order. So make sure you're working with your ordered pairs in the same order. So we put 3 as our first one, minus 4. Minus 6, excuse me. Alright, so we're going to get -2 plus -4 over 3 plus -6, which is -6 over -3. We're going to leave that as the ratio 2/1. So go ahead and try numbers 2 and 3, and then we'll check back and see how you're doing. Okay, so you should have -7/12 as your slope for 2, and you should have 0 as your slope for 3. So I want to stop for a minute and talk about what it means to have a 0 slope. So if you think about when you're rollerblading or skiing, if you think about moving and not having anything push you, just gravity pulling you down, if you have a slope, that means that you are going to, let's see if I can use my hands. If you have a slope, that means that you're going to rollerblade without having to propel yourself, right? But if you have no slope, that means you're not going to move at all, right? You're not going to move at all. So it's like standing on the ground. So the ground is a zero slope. So if I'm on the ground and it's flat, there's no slope. So if I'm standing there with my rollerblades, I'm not going to move at all. So that's what a zero slope is. Zero slope is actually a horizontal line. Because a zero slope means there's no slope, and you wouldn't move at all if you didn't have a slope. So it's a horizontal line. Okay? So go ahead and try number 4. This one is kind of an interesting one. So for this one, we should have 1 over 0 as our slope. And when you get 1 over 0 as your slope, that is called an undefined. 1 over 0, anything divided by 0 is called undefined in math. And I'll explain why in just a minute. Anything divided by 0 is called undefined. So this is actually called an infinite slope. That symbol stands for infinite. Or undefined slope. So what this means, this is for lines that are vertical. If you think about rollerblading, it's actually impossible, or skiing or anything like that, it's actually impossible to rollerblade straight down a vertical line, right? You can't do that. That's impossible. So when you have anything over 0, that's going to be a vertical line. And it's called an infinite or undefined slope. So let's think about dividing by 0 and why you cannot divide by 0. So if I have, I'm just going to kind of do this to the side. If I have 6 times 2 equals 12, well, then I know that 12 divided by 6 is 2, and 12 divided by 2 equals 6. Okay, so, but if I have, say, 9 divided by 0, that's not going to work, because that would be saying that I had 9 times something that equaled 0. And there's nothing times 9. All right, so scratch that last thought. Anyway, if I have 9 divided by 0, and I was trying to figure out what that would equal, that would mean that something times 0 equals 9, but nothing times 0 equals 9. So this is actually why you cannot divide by 0. This is impossible. It's impossible to divide by 0, because nothing times 0 equals 9. 9 is the thing. 9 is the answer to the multiplication question, right? And there's nothing times 0 that equals 9. So it's impossible to divide by 0. So anyway, that's something hopefully you learned in earlier years, but now when we end up with division of 0, when it comes to slope, that means you have a vertical line or undefined slope or infinite slope. So now that we've practiced finding slope with 2 points, now we're going to practice finding the slope given a graph. So here we have a graph. Now what you're going to have to do is find 2 points that are super clear. Okay, so there's only 2 on here that are pretty easy to see. This one and this one. So go ahead and find the slope between those 2 points, and I'd like you to use the graph to do it instead of the formula. Okay, so moving from the bottom point up, I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that gives me my numerator, and then I move sideways 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is my denominator. Remember, this is rise over run. How far up we go over how far sideways we go. Both of them were in the positive direction. Now we could do it the other way around. We could go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'd get -6 and go backwards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and get negative 7. But again, our slope would